Hello, everybody. I'm Charlie Fitzpatrick, and we're delighted that you are joining us. This is the session, Teaching in the COVID-19 Era. When we knew that we were going to be on a virtual setting, I knew that we had to have a session that was just this session. And I thought about, we needed to have some people with a lot of experience who understand what the power of GIS, what it can do, and the challenges that come with trying to help somebody engage it, but seeing the school in its broadest context as being a part of society, seeing it that way. So we've got 4 people from different perspectives, different angles of education. These are delightful people. We're going to start with Alice M., an English teacher at the Math, Science, and Technology Magnet Academy of Roosevelt High School in LAUSD. This is in the storied Boyle Heights region of East Los Angeles. And some of you may remember Alice being on stage at the Esri conference a couple of times. With us today also, Erica Close, who up until a couple of years ago was teaching middle school science and got plucked really up to the state level to be the STEM, GIS, and computer science coordinator for the West Virginia Department of Ed. Also with us, Christine Fox, who is one of the busiest people we know right now. She is the Deputy Director for the State Educational Technology Directors Association. CETA is the group of EdTech directors of all of the states, with various other districts engaged and some partners. And CETA tries to get people talking to each other and working with each other to improve education by taking advantage of technology in all the ways that they can. And wrapping up the panel is Rick Fertig, the Summit Professor of Learning Technologies at Kent State University, and that's just one of a dozen pieces in Rick's pantheon of tasks these days. These are all very busy people, so I'm delighted that we've been able to engage them. And so what I have asked them to do is to have a discussion about the situation that we are in right now with remote learning, equity, and the future of education as our themes for the day. And it's going to be a real discussion. And so I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we should be just automatically moving into gallery mode. And the whole idea that we want to do is to have a discussion. And Rick, I think I'm going to start with you and say, wow, we've all been through some months of chaos, and everybody who's out there listening has experienced some of that firsthand in lots of different ways. Was there anything good that happened this spring?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you listen to mass media, you would think it was the end of K-12 education, but there actually were some great things that happened. And I want to start really quickly. I always start these conversations, and I'm sure my fellow panelists would feel the same way, just to thank the teachers and the administrators that are out there listening, because you went through an unprecedented time in the spring, and you deserve a lot of credit for all you've done. So thank you. I want to just throw out a couple things, and then I'd love for my co-panelists to comment on these. I mean, one of the things is that, you know, you wouldn't wish COVID on anyone, but educational technologists have been begging educators for a long time to look into the potential of technology enhanced instruction. Didn't have to be fully online, but at least technology enhanced instruction. And I think we kind of went from 0 to 60 in a couple days. And we saw some really, really exciting things coming out about the ways in which teachers were adapting and adopting to innovative technologies. I think that was really important. I think the second thing is that there were a lot of people that thought in March 2020 that online K-12 learning or blended K-12 learning was new, and they didn't realize that we've been doing it for 25 years, doing it, studying it, researching it, implementing it. And so it raised awareness for the best practices that exist in K-12 online and blended instruction. And then the final thing, is, and it's hard to say this is a good thing, but it raised awareness of the equity issues that are out there. I think a lot of people talked, about the issues of equity, but those really came to the forefront during spring 2020. And it actually, gave us something to look at and something to fix. So, again, there were some bad things that happened, and I know there's stories out there about, a lot of schools that had issues, but I think we saw teachers take on some really tremendous tasks and make some really great, have some really great outcomes in the spring.
Thanks. And Christine, you get to talk with and represent all of the EdTech leaders out there. What were you hearing from them?
So I will just reiterate what Rick said, that our members have been advocating for digital learning experience for students since 2001, and many of them have been in this field prior to that. And so we joke about wanting to print t-shirts that say, "I told you so," which has a little bit of jest. But we hope, there is truly a silver lining inside of all of this. The schools and districts that had been really shifting towards digital opportunities were able to gear up fairly quickly. No one had prepared truly for, an entire 9 weeks turning on a dime to digital, but those that had some of the infrastructure in place, the professional development, were able to make those shifts more seamlessly. And so I think there are some, shining stars. And as with throughout education, so many of those incredible teachers, took to heart wanting to connect with their students and did everything they could to help make that happen. And since the launch or the beginning of the pandemic, our members have been working tirelessly to, first and foremost, help secure access. So thinking of all students, both whether or not they had their own device, and or home access. And of course, now we need more access because there's all these simultaneous users. And then in really focusing on those rural students where it might not be an affordability, but much more of an availability issue. And so it has been a very long, I don't know how many, is it 5 months now? It gets confusing, but I do think lots of folks are really gearing towards trying to get the elements in place so to support, the learning, whatever that is going to look like. And then we do hope that we don't go back to kind of as things were, but truly having the teachers be encouraged to leverage digital tools and resources, both on site as well as at home throughout the school year.
And Erica, what was it like in West Virginia?
Well, I think that like so many states, we really had the whole gamut of districts that were sort of able to pivot really quickly because they had access, they had devices, they already had some amount of, remote learning sort of capabilities, and those teachers were able to just pivot to that. And in other cases, we didn't. And when that was the situation, we saw, amazing work done by districts and teachers that sort of like Christine said, they're just amazing educators and they're going to do whatever they can to reach their students. And if that means that they're putting together schoolwork and activities and resources and getting on a school bus that's out delivering, food to students, they're going to go ahead and do that. And I think that we just saw, in many cases, the real heart of education come out, because we saw all these educators that knew what still needed to happen and had to figure out how to make it happen. I think that for us, we saw some absolutely amazing online learning, which was really, really exciting. And then to sort of, to follow up with what Rick said, we saw so many other teachers that said, okay, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know enough about how to do this, or I don't have what I need to do this. So it really shined a light on what so many really needed to learn. And I think that if we've seen anything now, we see that hunger in our educators to learn how to best meet the needs of their kids, because they know this is different. And this, hopefully, as Christine said, we're not going to go back. Hopefully we take what we learn, but I think teachers really are in a position of wanting to learn.
So Alice, what was it like deep in the heart of LAUSD? And you hit your mute button and then, yep.
I know, I feel so bad because I'm like, there are silver linings, but I think just being a teacher in the classroom was just panic. Being a mom and just panicking and just, I mean, in retrospect, looking back, I'm like, okay, well, things still got learned and things, things were accomplished. And, I think for us, like as teachers, it's like, our children, our students were safe, we were able to respond and make sure that they were as safe as possible, and making sure that they knew that that was a priority as a school and as a community, that we were going to prioritize that. And it's so hard to talk about the good stuff because I want to always honor and be sensitive to, the hardships that the students really experienced, particularly in communities of color where, a lot of parents are essential workers, there aren't as many resources. So I'm definitely grateful that to echo some of those sentiments, right, that this idea of equity came up. And now people are really interested in like, okay, well, who actually has technology and who has a hotspot in their home? And it really became like an immediate thing that everybody had to respond to. When in the past, these are things that people have been bringing up, students learn in under different types of conditions, and all of a sudden now there's a focus on making sure that students had devices and that students were getting access, despite, the really challenging circumstances. So, I mean, for me, it was just super panic. Rewrite all your curriculum, reevaluate all of your assessments, rethink building community in your classroom and how we're going to facilitate learning. And then I'm a mom with 3 small kids. So how do I do that while, my 6-year-old, my 3-year-old, and my 1-year-old are without anybody to watch them, right? So I'm like, I have the money, but I don't have anywhere safe to put them. So my 3-year-old is babysitting my 1-year-old and the 6-year-old because she's the smart one. Well, she's the assertive one, right? And she's also the tattletale. So it's like, I'm like trying to do a talk through of some rhetorical analysis. And then I get reports like, Callie's taking snacks out of the cupboard. He's getting extra. So juggling all those things. So again, in retrospect, I think it's like one of those things where like we survived. And I guess the biggest thing for me is like, look how resilient we are and look how strong and creative. And, as a society, we, as a community and a society, we were able to really prioritize student safety and community safety and still find ways to learn and also like take care of ourselves and to be together with our families and to do all these things that, I mean, a lot of times we're just being swept under the rug or, just being passed over because there was a status quo to maintain. So, I mean, I think for me, that was also a big thing. It's just like, here's this opportunity to challenge the status quo without fear, because guess what? There was no testing this year and there was no, there are all these things that were removed and people could start to think of a different way. And I just want to piggyback on Christine and Erica. I don't think that there's any way that people will go back,
Well, so you've got some young ones that were, I remember being in a Zoom with you at one point, and 3 of them were in the window with you as you were trying to address a question for a student. And I thought, wow, this is a challenging environment to be teaching in.
Honestly, no, I think it's challenging for me, but like I said, I think it actually worked out better because, again, it's how we reimagine that. And I think part of I mean, from a mom perspective, it changes the dynamic, because I think as women, and I think our society is always like, you know, you need to keep your babies at home. Work and home is separate. And I think as women, you're like, no, like this is part of my identity, and being able to bring my kids to work and into that space with me was actually kind of magical. Like, you know, my kids, well, my students, see, now they're all my kids, but the students, right, were like, oh, those are Miss M's kids. And like every time, because my 6-year-old is kind of like a Zoom, like attention seeker, like every time, like he'll be doing whatever, and the minute I'm on Zoom and he's like, like he's like the guy in the back who's like, look at my dinosaur. But every time he would pop up, the kids just thought it was like so funny, and they would be like, show us your baby, show us your dog, miss. And all of a sudden, that's what I'm saying, all of a sudden the ways that we build community became different, but I mean still really powerful. And
so it's a humanizing thing.
yeah, it was.
Christine, I know you have a couple at home with you. How did it go for you being at home?
Yes. So I am the mother of a for last school year, 7th and 9th grade girls. I have always worked from home. CETA can be a completely virtual organization. We never had a brick and mortar office. So having everybody at home was first a challenge, you know, summers and days off. But also here locally, the structure really wasn't in place. You know, we did have a device for each child, so that's, you know, different than some homes. The broadband sometimes was iffy, especially with multiple people on Zoom. And so my personal and professional life definitely collided. And this is where you see the great teachers doing great things, and people that you might have already been frustrated with continue that frustration. And I think for me, especially with the mapping, someone mentioned here about AP Human, my daughter was taking that class, and I know her teacher was really trying, and math and science for sure. There's a great need there, you know, for direct instruction. And it was very hard, and it's exhausting. I was on Wednesday, somehow I was home alone for a couple of hours, and I texted all my friends and my coworkers, like, nobody's here. I'm alone. I can work in the kitchen. And I always worked in the kitchen before. So, you know, I think for them, they were not in one-to-one environments for middle school, but they were in elementary. So they had some knowledge base there. And just like anything else here, the teachers, it was a bit mixed bag of who already used online tools and resources and who didn't. And so those that had, even if they like dipped their toes in the water, were better prepared. And now the district is being a lot more forthcoming and having heavier requirements. But you know, back to Alice and Rick's point, the idea is, I do think so many people, the idea was to get something done and engage those students, whether you're driving by their house or having a quick Zoom, and the amount of content that they acquired may not have been in the same pace. And my older daughter's in IB, and sometimes I think maybe that was better. Like the end of the year was going to be so intense emotionally about the amount of content and end of year courses and AP and IB exams, that perhaps this, you know, was a blessing in disguise. So yeah, thanks for asking. I'm still struggling. I am definitely struggling with that as school is upon us again.
Erica, was there, did you hear from your colleagues about anything, you know, with people trying to work from home?
Absolutely. I think the first thing I heard was, how do I use Microsoft Teams? You know, I mean, I think a lot of what I heard was that initial, you know, how do I use the technology? If, you know, if they weren't in a district that already had a robust learning management system, you know, and were already sort of prepared to at least be in contact with their students remotely and get assignments to their students remotely, a lot of them, it was just, where do I start? So it was, what's the best way to get in contact with students? How do I use Teams? You know, can I use Zoom? You know, what are best practices? You know, initially it really was that sort of really basic, how do I teach? How do I recreate this, being able to stand up in front of my students? And then, as time went on, it transitioned to what is the best way to take this kind of assignment and turn it into something that they can complete digitally, or what is an alternative method for my students to demonstrate their understanding to me, as opposed to writing something or typing me something. So, I think that the questions changed throughout time. I've seen that throughout the summer too. Now the questions are much more related to student learning. I think that now, teachers are really trying to understand how best to provide true teaching, and to have evidence that their students are learning. In addition to what's already been mentioned, just that idea of how do I build relationship? How do I maintain relationships? How do I make sure my students are all right? That sort of communication.
And Rick, you somehow, with I think Hermione Granger's time turner, engaged some friends and colleagues, I think, and were able to get some research done. Can you talk about that? I'm intrigued to hear about what kinds of things they might have uncovered.
Yeah, so I think this is provided as part of the free resources, but just as kind of a quick backdrop, we realized the work that the medical field was doing in trying to produce fast responses. And so we put out a call in April to do a special issue of a journal on teaching during COVID. We expected maybe 10 or 15 responses to the special issue and got 266. And so I actually turned that into an 850-page book that, again, I will put the link to, but you actually, it's a free book, 116 chapters that describes some kind of best practices, things that went well, things that didn't go well, kind of as a early resource, and now looking towards fall, kind of a preparation for fall. And we did see, a lot of really interesting outcomes. I want to go back to, in the context of your question, Charlie, I want to go back to this idea that, we hope we don't go back to the way we were. And I'm actually nervous that we're going to. And the reason I'm nervous we're going to is because of the way that we heard a lot of teachers talk during during spring in preparation for fall. And Alice, I think this gets at some of the equity issues that you raised as well. The conversation was, we just got to get over that. Like, as soon as we have a cure, as soon as we have a vaccine, as soon as we'll be back, everything will be fine. And then we can just go back to business as usual. We can just go back to normal. And I think what we saw in the spring was that a lot of teachers, particularly those that had been either well prepared or received just-in-time professional development, said, we're engaging in this now, so that even if we do go back to quote unquote normal, we will be better off than where we were before. And so we will use technology enhanced instruction to support the work that we're doing. Conversely, the failure stories that we heard were teachers that were bemoaning it, teachers that just wanted to get back to business as usual. And what that meant during COVID is they were doing things like 6 hours a day of Zoom, which is just ridiculous. I mean, it flies in the face of 25 years of research on what works well in online learning. Or what they were doing is, again, in this preparation for spring. By the way, the Zoom thing is also obviously an equity issue, because now you've got to have kids that have devices and have to have high internet connection and have to be on for 6 hours a day in places where they may not want to connect live. But then in preparation for the spring, they weren't thinking about the kinds of things they needed to do to prepare. So you have this scenario where we're going into fall. There's a lot of people that are going back face-to-face with the expectation they might all of a sudden have to go blended or online. And there was so much, we just got to get over this, that I'm nervous they're not prepared. And the one interesting finding for me is that the teachers in the spring who were maybe not the most prepared, but the most confident in their abilities as teachers, had students with the most amount of successful outcomes. And the teachers that were bemoaning and belittling and talking about how horrible online and blended instruction were, actually had students that had the worst outcomes, because the students were essentially set up for failure of, I know this is horrible, we'll find a way to get through it together. And it that's the way it actually transpired, is the students just were set up for failure. So I know that's a lot. So it's a lot of stuff in one, and a lot of those stories are in the free book. But I just think we have to do a better job, because I am nervous that the haves and the professionally developed and well-developed teachers are going to succeed, or at least lean towards succeeding no matter what. And I'm afraid that the ones that were not prepared are still not going to be prepared, and we're going to go back to the way it was. I'm nervous about that. I hope I'm proven wrong, but I'm nervous about that.
Christine, let me jump over to you with that, thinking about this from the equity standpoint. You've been involved in a lot of those things from CETA and listening to the leaders. Can you jump in on this and talk about the equity issue that you're hearing from people?
Sure. So, and this was a question in the Q&A tool as well from someone, I think from Denmark. So asking, who is one-to-one? The equity issue has been an issue that CETA has reported on and published resources related to, since our inception, but most prevalently since 2012 for sure, regarding access to broadband at home and devices. And this is something that's had been keeping our members up at night, but now truly since March, some of them are driving hotspots when they become available out to students. So there is a push, I would say, in every state to get access out to those students. Some states are using their CARES Act funding. There were kind of two buckets of funding there, the K-12 funding, recommending to their districts that first and foremost, they spend the money on, the cleaning supplies and resources in the building to restructure, as well as providing access. Several governors dedicated their GEARS Act funding directly to devices. Some states, and so some of those governors are Indiana, Illinois, some states, Pennsylvania and Texas, quickly before the federal government even had funding out, started state-funded grant competitions, really with that focus of trying to get a quality device larger than a phone. We advocate for something larger than a phone for students because the goal really is also for students to create content. And sure, you can, they'll watch as many videos as they can on even a larger smartphone, but for them to create content and writing, we believe in something larger than a phone, and then have seamless access. And even as of yesterday, I was on a call where state leaders are working with district leaders because people are still trying to figure out who needs what. And it is frightening that it's August and this started in March and states and districts are still not truly sure. I mean, I filled out a Palm Beach County School District survey, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, again, asking and of course, online surveys for people that don't have access is already a problem. So unfortunately, there's still some data crunching and the numbers are all over the place. And in the big picture, CETA is working with a variety of other educational and other nonprofit organizations, encouraging dedicated access in the next stimulus package that they're fighting over right now. And that hasn't been a line item as of yet, but that is something we've been trying to inform. And an hour before this call, somebody said, give me some examples. Where are some districts doing the right thing? How can we, so it's fast and furious for sure, but equity is a major problem.
So Erica, how did that play out? How was West Virginia positioned for this? Did you have a number of places with one-to-one or mobile carts, or how was it set up?
Well, we have 55 county school districts within our state, and we had probably about 10 to 15 of them that really had a county level one-to-one initiative. In many other cases, it was something maybe that a school had done, or they did something for their high schools, or it was more sporadic. I have been talking to contacts that I have, like with Apple, and I know that when I've heard that a number of our districts have now ordered massive numbers of iPads and things like that. So I have a feeling that when those can get in, I don't know if they have enough iPads in the world for what all schools have now ordered. But, you know, when that comes in, I think the situation may change, but we did not have any kind of even distribution across the board in terms of districts that were one-to-one. And in addition, you know, we have tremendous variety in terms of the ability to connect. We have so many rural areas, and our topography and geography just really does not make it simple for a lot of our families to have broadband access, or even to be able to use a hotspot for like cellular access, or to be able to use their phone as a hotspot or things like that. We have a lot of places where there just is not cellular access. So I really think that that is in many ways our main issue. I mean, we are looking at, you know, the health and the welfare of our students, and then the connections of our students. And for example, just on Wednesday, our governor announced that we'd be putting more powerful Wi-Fi routers at every public school, public library, higher ed institution, and state park. Many of our schools did increase the availability of their Wi-Fi outside, like to the parking lot. But in some cases, all they could really do was take a router and like tape it to a window, you know, to get the signal to be a little bit further out there. But the governor has committed monies from, I'm pretty sure, our CARES Act money to now get those out, and that work is happening right away. And I know because I got to help make the map last night for where those are supposed to be. But you know, it's this sort of iterative, you know, moving to fix the equity issue. You know, what can we do quickly? And so if we have students who are going to be learning virtually this fall, then, you know, they might need that. And in most of our districts, the choice has been put on our parents to decide if their students are going to go to school, physically to school, whether to 5 days or more of a blended model, or whether they're going to go to school virtually. So we have the West Virginia Virtual School that always has, you know, a small enrollment. It's designed to fill in gaps. If you have a school that can't provide a certain course, students can take that, and it's not filling in gaps this year. The enrollment is skyrocketing. Again, that is available to our students that have the privilege of living in a place where they can connect. Generally, a parent that has no access is not likely to choose that for their student. So, you know, again, the equity and access is still an issue, even with what is a great solution. So it's iterative. It's solve a problem, find a problem, solve a problem, find a problem. But, you know, it's the mindset, you know, it's the mindset of the teacher, like Rick said. I think it's the mindset of the people in an organization like a Department of Ed or a county school district, where, you know, they are just looking to solve problems, and that's, you know, that's what we're doing.
So Alice, I saw you smile a bit as Christine was talking about a phone, and a phone is not a fully capable digital device. And I've watched some of your kids actually typing on their phones. And so can you talk about how it worked for the families at your school?
Well, I mean, I feel like we've been really lucky in the sense that our school invested in going one-to-one 3 or 4 years ago. And so our students all had Chromebooks, but it's so different to hear somebody talk about it from like a higher level, because I think on the day-to-day, it's like you get Chromebooks, and then I can tell you that the screens break, the buttons don't work. You know, how many times I've sat with students and I'm like, let me help you, and they're like, oh, miss, you have to hold the A down really hard. You know, and it's like the Chromebook that they were issued as a 9th grader, and now it's an 11th grader. There are these quirky little machines that they are, you know, dependent on. So I mean, I just got out of a staff meeting, and you know, it was already like, well, what's a hotspot situation going to be like? And you know, the principal said something like, you know, we have 5 hotspots right now. You know, for school 450, we're going to figure out who needs them first. We're going to prioritize seniors because they're working on, you know, college applications. And in the back of my head, I was like, oh, I know Christine. It's like, I shouldn't even, I don't know if I will get a hookup, but I feel like it's like one of those I'm with the band moments. Like, but I was just smiling because the whole hotspot conversation came back. And so I just feel like educators saying there's so much uncertainty. And there's so much, like, UTLA just came out, you know, we just bargained with the district about synchronous versus asynchronous instruction and how many minutes we need, instructional minutes we need to meet, and how are we going to take attendance, and how are we going to, well, I mean, I'll be honest, I feel very lucky to have UTLA because their priority has really been about checking in on students and making sure that, you know, that we're addressing the social emotional needs first and making sure that that's being advocated first and foremost. But I mean, definitely it's been so much uncertainty. You know, people are like, what are you planning? You're like, I don't know what to plan because I don't know what's happening because nobody knows. And school's going to start in a week or two. So it's definitely difficult. And I think that's what I'm saying. It's also really difficult when, as an adult, I know that there's lots of layers in how things get distributed and how we're trying to, you know, everyone's working really hard to solve these problems. And I really appreciate that, you know, now there's this focus on making sure that technology equity is being addressed. But it's really heartbreaking when you have a student who had A's and B's and then came back, you know, because I see teachers that are like, we couldn't fail the kids. No, I had students who were good students and they didn't have Wi-Fi access for 2 or 3 weeks, and when they came back, we're deflated because, you know, they couldn't get failed, but now their A and B was down to a D, and, you know, and you're trying to console a kid, going like, hey, you know what? It's okay. It's not you.
Uh-oh, speaking of, all right, this is one of the pieces that I'm just sort of intrigued with, is thinking about.
You know that had to happen when you were talking about equity and access. You know that had to happen, right?
Yeah,
Like that was,
I've
you
actually
claimed that, right?
I've actually had this competition. We actually did some GIS research with our 11th graders, and, you know, all their research projects pivoted. It was like food deserts, and then all of a sudden it was like food access and COVID. And one of our student teams was looking at distance learning, and we were thinking through like what affects this. And so the kids are like, well, having Chromebooks and access, and somebody was like Wi-Fi. And so we were like, you know, they have those things where you could test how fast your Wi-Fi is. So I remember I was like working with a small group, and we're like, let's all test to see how fast our Wi-Fi is. And I learned something new. So I didn't know that the smaller the number, the better your Wi-Fi is, right? It's like it measures in something. See, I'm not a tech person, but I was like, oh, I lost. You guys totally kicked my butt. They were like, oh, Miss, no, you won. Your Wi-Fi is like so good. Like, that's amazing. So we have
Christine?
lots of conversations about this, but
Yeah. Well,
That is,
okay, hold, Christine, jump in here.
yeah, well, no, just yesterday, a conversation with state leaders was about asking about access. So there's also 2 types of access, right? Like your download speeds and your upload. So your ability to participate in a Zoom or watch it or bring down a video, but then also when you have assignments or you're using tools that require those upload speeds. And the challenge of asking parents what their speeds are like, or if they're good enough, because the parents may or may not know, or they don't know how to use the test. And that's why it gets so complicated, and there's really not a great data set. So states did come together to come up with a set of standard data questions to ask families. Unfortunately, that was just published 2 weeks ago, and people have already asked, right? And then with the speed tests, it depends on what the test is. I know here locally, there was a little bar. When I answered my parent survey, do you have a device? Do you have this or that? There was a little bar at the top that was indicating. So they were collecting data on at least my ability to access that site. North Carolina worked with the university, and they have a tool where optional. Parents can enter their address, and then they agree to the speed test, and then they gather data that way. So because a lot of families, I mean, they don't know like how much they really need or what they're paying for versus what do you need when two parents are working from home plus two high school students all live streaming. So there's a lot of variables on the technology.
Yeah. And Rick, I'm hoping that you can comment on something that I've been hearing more frequently in the news these days, which is people talking about leaving formal school and developing little pods. Have you been encountering that, and have any thoughts about the rise of pods?
I'm glad you saved the easy question for me.
Yeah.
So it's a complex question. I'm afraid whatever I say may be held against me in a court of law. So let me just say this. The one concern that I have about people, I mean, whether they're leaving or staying, and this has kind of been an underlying trend in the conversation for the last 40 minutes or so, is this idea of the pedagogy. And I think where people are running to, or where people are running from, they're tempted, and this is again a concern, but also a direction for fall. They're attempting to go to a technology, or they're attempting, and I'm not suggesting that somehow technology access isn't an important feature. It is, but we go back to the 90s when you had governors who were so concerned about having one class, one technology, one computer in every classroom, or they were worried about, we're going to make sure we have broadband in every single classroom, or we're going to make sure we have X, Y, Z. And I'm not against those things, but what I'm more concerned with is in most of those situations, you don't have people that are addressing pedagogy. You don't have people that are addressing professional development. You don't have people that are addressing even software in some cases, which is a different issue. You don't have people that are addressing support for teachers. You don't have people that are addressing support for parents. So what my concern is whether they're staying or whether they're going. I know we've seen some chat kind of coming back and forth in terms of, people even jump, they're going to virtual schools or they're going to homeschooling, is, kind of what are the pedagogical practices that are being put in place. And so I would want to really make sure that whether it was a district or whether it was a parent or whether it was a family member, and especially, we talk about equity, we also have, students that are at health risks as well, that are cautious about returning to school because of health risks. And so they're asking questions, about how they can be supported. So I don't want to lose that fact that a lot of the challenges, if you go back to the success stories of the spring, or you go back to the areas where people really struggled, even my confidence comment, it wasn't about confidence in teaching with technology. It was about confidence as an instructor and understanding pedagogical best practices and understanding things like classroom management. So quick example, what's one of the biggest struggles that teachers had in the spring? Well, we talked ad nauseum about this idea of digital natives, and which has its own set of issues. But embedded in that is the fact that these kids knew what to do online, and they knew how to educate themselves, and they were comfortable enough. And that wasn't true. Being able to teach kids how to orient them to be successful in these online or blended environments, again, that's part of pedagogy, that classroom management and communication, and those are the things that teachers have to be successful with. So I know I hopefully successfully sideswiped your question, but the point is that wherever they end up going or staying, yes, the technology is important, but we've got to go back to this idea of what are the pedagogical practices that people are doing in these environments so that we can then be successful. And Alice and Christine and Eric, I'm sure, we've talked about that before, but I mean, wouldn't you agree that some of the successful practices that you've seen in your own districts or areas have been tied to, engaging teachers in pedagogical beliefs and a restructuring of pedagogical beliefs?
Well, and this is good. Jump in, Alice.
Well, I mean, I really want to echo that. And I guess maybe that's why I feel like we're not going to go back. And I have the privilege of having a lot of student teachers, and I've seen a lot of teacher ed programs, and I'm already kind of like an older teacher now. So I'm kind of like, every time I meet new teachers, young teachers, I'm like, wow, like you're so like, this was like cutting edge when I was your age. And this is something that you've already gravitated to so easily. including the use of technology, but also pedagogy. And I think that's where, I mean, that's the exciting part for me. I think, I mean, I'm sure for the educational technologists, this is a moment, but also for pedagogy, right? Because all of a sudden, like, you can't measure. I think a lot of times school has been kind of been rooted in this 20th century model where it's like, how many minutes did you sit in class and how many worksheets did you produce, and all these standard measures of how we evaluate our student learning, right, have gone out the window. And now it's not like, well, how many minutes did you participate in Zoom? We really have to think about like, well, how did you learn? And all the things that we want to like quote assign to kids, like giving them quizzes that are based on memorization or figuring things, you know, you can't do that because I'll be honest, they can hack things and they could Google answers. And now we have to rethink our assessments and think of real authentic assessments, which as an English teacher, I love, of course, because I'm like, we're writing an essay, like we're writing, because that's something that can't be faked. And I think that is the most exciting part. And kind of to those some of those statements about like, you know, kids are struggling to get online, and I guess that's also where I feel there's a lot of strength in some of those quote, you know, underserved communities. Our students are resilient. So I've had, you know, I was teaching our GIS project with students who are like following along, and they're like, Miss, I'm trying to add the layer, and it was like, okay, and she's like, it's loading. And like, we're sitting there 5 minutes later and she's outside on her patio and going like, it's okay. And, you know, you're like, it's okay, man. Like, we'll wait it out. Like, how's your mom? Let me see your dog. So, right, those habits of mind and those, right, that's what we're trying to teach students, right? To be flexible, to be resilient, to be creative, to, and I think that's really exciting because as a teacher, this is horrible, and they probably hate this about me. I'm always like, don't worry about your grade. It doesn't matter. And they're like, of course it matters, miss. My future relies on my grade. You have the power. And I'm like, no, really, it's, I mean, I'm going to try to get you as good a grade as you can, you know, as possible. And I'm going to support you the best, but it's really not that important. We don't live in a society where if you got a C in English, you know, your destiny is forever doomed. Who you are as a person and how you engage with the world and how you know, work with others, right? Like that's what's important. How interested are you? How engaged are you with your surroundings? And please don't worry about your grade. And they're just like, what?
So Alice, I mean, just to that point really quickly, I mean, I think you're right. And the funny thing is, you know, if I were to ask teachers in February, how do you get kids engaged? How do you know, teach them these skills or these attitudes or this knowledge, and how do you get them focused on the right things? And they would all give me really, really strong answers. And then March hit, and it's like all those pedagogical practices went out the window. So you talk to one teacher, they're like, well, look, I work in small groups, and I work in small groups for small amounts of time, and I let them focus on this, and I differentiate learning, and blah, blah, blah. And then they go, okay, what'd you do in March? Well, I sat in 6 hours in Zoom with everybody. It's like, wait, why? And now the problem is now you have districts that are going, okay, guess what, teachers? We bought you Zoom. Here we go. Here's fall. We bought you Zoom just in case. And it's like, but that's not the pedagogical practices that you knew worked. And so we, you know, how do we return back to that? That's where I.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah. Well, I think also that's part of like the unions and the, again, that tension with like trying to control, right? Making sure that teachers are really teaching enough, you know, and it's, look, we're teachers, we care, we're trying, okay? But I do think that there's also patience. And that's what, you know, we teach our students. It's like, I don't know, for me, maybe that's why I'm a teacher, because I'm a very hopeful person, where it was like March was really crummy. And sometimes you try things and things are really crummy and you fail miserably, and that is okay. You know what I mean? That is okay. And we can do that collectively as a society. We can do that as individuals, but don't fear failure, and don't fear having a crappy day and feeling disappointed and feeling, those are natural feelings. We all go through them, right? But I do have a feeling of hope that like collectively, you know, we're going to be able to kind of respond to that trauma and this jarring thing. Because I do have faith in technology. I do have faith in our ability to be creative. There's so many cool things, you know, that people are being forced to engage with, even when they were resistant. And then you're like, what is this app? What is this thing? And clearly, there are so many tools that make our lives easier and better, that once you use it, it's kind of like, well, why would I go back? Is everything going to stick? Probably not. Are there negative Nancys? There always are, you know? But I do think that, you know, on a higher level, we should be pushing, because I feel like a lot of times with policy, it's like, how do we hold people accountable? And I think not only in pedagogy, but like as a society, we need to move away from that. And it's like, well, let's make more rules versus like, well, how can we support people more? It's the same thing with like, I was in a staff meeting and I was like, what's our progressive discipline policy? And I was like, dude, we're not in school. Do we need a discipline policy? And it's like, I get it. That's what we've always had. But I was like, they can't, like, what do you, if they're disruptive, just mute them. Like, why do we need a discipline policy? How about, and then we were reading the policy and I was like, the kid is not engaged. The kid is not participating. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like a discipline thing. That sounds like a engagement thing, right? Like, how do I bring you back in? So, right, like, why are we disciplining that? So I think with teachers, they generally, for the most part, want to teach and they want kids to learn. And I have faith that, you know, we can be creative and that there's enough good stuff out there. I don't know, just as long as the district and the rule people aren't like, hey, did you take attendance and did you mark 18 boxes to make sure that the kids, because you're like, I don't know how to do that. I want to
pause on that. That's it. There's a good hopeful sign in there. All right, we've got just a very short time left. I want to ask each of you to prepare for a serious question, to prepare for one thing to toss in here. Imagine a spectrum from all the way, everything remote, everybody remote, full-time remote, to everybody back to the way they were, back to February of school, and everywhere in between. And we're kind of in the more, I'm hearing that we're going to be more in the remote side. There's a histogram, obviously, but I'm sensing more on the remote side than on the back in the way we were in February side coming up. That was 5 months ago when all this stuff hit the fan. And now, think about 5 months from now. What is something that you would really like your school, your district, your state, the feds to be paying attention to that they might not have paid attention to over the last 4 or 5 months? And Erica, I'm going to pick on you first and see if there's something that you can say that I really want people to be paying attention to this, because we don't want to get to January and be in exactly the same position. So what could they do?
Well, I don't want to steal this from Rick, and hopefully he's not going to say this, but I think it is, I hope that, you know, everyone at every level, you know, in education is looking at the pedagogy and is encouraging pedagogy and is encouraging teachers to teach and to come in with that mindset of, I'm a teacher, I'm going to teach regardless of the situation, and to develop in their students the mindset of, I'm a student, I'm here to learn, and I'm going to learn in whatever that situation is. I think
cool.
That's my hope, because there are ways to differentiate if you're remote. There are ways to put students into small groups. We can do our best practices.
That's good. Christine, I'm going to jump to you next, because you're representing all of the states out there. We got one state now, you got all the rest of them. What is something that you would like to see people paying attention to?
That's a lot of pressure, Charlie.
It is.
So, you know, in my state role, I would say this seamless ongoing access probably should be what I say, because between the devices and the broadband and then that tech support Alice was mentioning, like this stuff, just everyone's just buying things now. And apart from the fact that not all the teachers know how to use them, there has to be plans in place for upgrading and that support. But in my other little hat as a parent, I think informing the parents of this opportunity and the pedagogy is critical. If I had, well, let's see, I have 7 plus, if I had 15 Alice's teaching my kids, you know, I'd be going around doing a dance and celebrating all the time, but not everybody's there yet. So
Okay.
I think supporting parents is critical too.
All right, Alice, I'm going to pick on you next. You're at the school level here. What should they be paying attention to?
I know it's fair. Okay, so mine would be like, everybody needs to relax. We're in a global pandemic, and let's all relax, be kind to each other, be patient with each other. That's kind of my motto right now. Let's just take care of each other and be grateful for each other. But I guess like if I could influence people higher up, it'd be like making sure that there's an effort to be inclusive and transparent and communicative in these decisions. So like I feel like, you know, PDs get bought, or, you know, PD plans get developed, and it's like, here, this is what you're doing. And you're like, oh, as a teacher, I don't know if I want this. And making sure that teachers and parents and everybody actually, like, not only do you get this thing, but you're consulted about it, and then you're given the time and the space and the resources to actually engage with it meaningfully. Because just buying me something is not going to help, right?
All right. Okay, Rick, you got 30 seconds to give us, to encapsulate your profession for advice for the countryside.
Okay, so here's the big advice. I've tried a bunch of things over the last 25 years, but also the last 5 months. The one thing that has worked is that getting teachers into online learning experiences as students. Most of them, we don't do that in teacher education. And so most of them went into spring and are going into fall having never have taken an online experience whatsoever. The best thing that I found has worked is getting them into those experiences so they can see what it's like from the other side of the desk, if you will.
Wow. Wow. All right. This has been outstanding. I want to say thank you to our panelists. You guys are amazing. This is I was so looking forward to this, and this has just been such fun to listen to.